In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with Greg Gaston. Today, we'll talk Tigers football with Frank Bonner, Tigers football beat writer for the Daily Memphian, and a little Tigers basketball as well with Parth Upadhyaya, the Tigers basketball beat writer for the Daily Memphian. Frank, good afternoon. How are you?
Doing all right. Always good to see you every week.
Same here. How was your trip to Birmingham? Good?
Yes, short. Just went down there, covered the game, got back home.
By the way, what'd you think of the stadium?
I liked it. I mean, obviously you could tell that it was new, fresh and everything, but I didn't have issues with it.
3 miles away from campus, so it's not an on-campus stadium. It's owned by the city. When they built this thing, it was before COVID. It wasn't that long ago, but before COVID, I think it was around 175, 180 million. If you tried to build that today, I was talking to some folks, $400 million.
Inflation is just crazy that's kind of the situation that Memphis got into when they were looking at whether they wanted to renovate or build on campus. Mm-hmm. Like whatever model you had from what a college did a few years ago is already outdated.
Labor, the cost of material, everything has gone up, skyrocketed since COVID. So that's another thorn in the side of people who want an on-campus stadium. And of course, that issue's been talked about for years and years and years. That's not happening. Obviously, the stadium being renovated is going to happen, we think. We may touch on that at the end of this conversation. But as far as the game is concerned, the Tigers beat UAB 45-21. They improved to 5-2 and 2-1 in the conference. Didn't start out well, Frank. Again, 5 straight games that the Tigers have trailed to begin the game. Now, offensively, they scored on their first 2 possessions, scored touchdowns. But defensively, it was almost like they were still at the hotel or they took this team for granted. Whatever the case was, slow start for the Tigers.
Yeah, and it's kind of twofold, right? Because before we were talking about slow starts, it was always about the offense. Well, the offense got off to a pretty quickly start, like you said. But I think part of it is, and Ryan touched on it a little bit in the postgame and even on Monday, them warming up their starting quarterback and then not starting him and playing 3 different quarterbacks throughout the game kind of threw the defense for a loop. He mentioned the missed tackles were an issue, but I mean, after that second half, I think they kind of realized what they needed to do. They made some adjustments and they were able to get it done.
Starting quarterback is a guy by the name of Zeno, who's a really good one. One of the better quarterbacks in the conference and around the country. He's one of the top guys as far as completion percentage. Throws shorter passes, doesn't really throw it down the field, but he's their leader. And as you said, Frank, he's out there warming up. He does not play. We were all stunned. The broadcast team, we were not expecting him to not be able to go. As you said, they go with 3 different quarterbacks throughout the course of that game. And when Ryan talked about it, you almost had that sense of kind of tongue-in-cheek, not real happy with the gamesmanship from Trent Dilfer. I don't want to speak for him, but I got that feeling. I don't know if you did. Again, there's not much you can do because there's not an injury report in college football like there is in the NFL. But that's kind of a little shady area, I would think.
Yeah, and then not only that, right? Brett McMurphy tweeted out that Landry was going to start in his place, and then you start the game and Landry doesn't start. So I'm assuming Brett McMurphy got that from somebody within the program or somebody on that sideline, and even that was wrong.
Right. It ended up being Barker. That's Jay Barker's son, the former Alabama quarterback. He ends up starting. And for a while there, the defense, whatever you want to say, whether they weren't ready from the get-go, they took them a little for granted, they were confused with the quarterback situation, and they were running a lot of quarterback draws. They were having a lot of success. Whatever it was, they were having their issues. And within a minute or less than a minute, UAB goes right down the field, scores the touchdown, gets the 2-point conversion because what does Trent Dilfer have to lose? Might as well go for 2s. You're up 8-0 before you could blink an eye, obviously before people were in their seats. There wasn't that many overall.
Yeah, I mean,
but
it was 3 plays.
3 plays they scored, and it was certainly jarring for that Tigers defense, especially for defensive coordinator Matt Barnes.
Yeah, and the thing, that you mentioned about Trent Different and his aggressiveness going for 2 obviously worked out. I do think that he may have been a little too aggressive in that first half. I think he should have kicked that field goal.
I do too.
And so, I think he left some points on the board. He probably wish he got back, or who knows, he might have felt like that's just how I'm going to coach in my first year, and that's just going to be what it is. But, I think that cost him a couple points.
Yeah, I would have given him the lead at that point, but I guess his thought process was, we can't win with field goals. We can only win with touchdowns. Whatever the case was, the defense kind of figured it out at the end of the second quarter, right before halftime. They get a couple of stops. Of course, they would end up controlling the game in the second half. So give them credit. It seems like it's a recurring theme with Memphis, whether it be offense, but normally defense, that they can make really good adjustments.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, and Ryan has said it before, said it a couple times after games where he'll make a comment where he'll say that the coaching staff did something that they weren't necessarily prepared for or that they didn't see on film. Well, once you see it for a half, you go in the locker room, you get it together, they come out and they handle business. And so I think you tip your hat off to the coaching staff for being able to make in-game adjustments, and you tip your hat off to those players to be able to execute the way they did.
You certainly want to win the turnover battle. It doesn't guarantee you'll win, but if you're in the positive, you're more than that positive column, you're more than likely going to win a football game. 4 turnovers the Tigers defense forced in the second half, 3 of them interceptions, 1 a pick 6 by Malik Feaster. You do that, Frank. Again, there's no looking back. They completely dominated that second half.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it was a big way for those DBs to respond because defensive coordinator Matt Barnes was kind of hard on them in terms of just catching the balls that were thrown to you. If you look at that Tulane game, there were a lot of would-be interceptions that hit him in the hands and they just dropped to the ground. And then so the next week, the ball hit him in the hands and they caught it. So you tip your hat off to them for owning the mistakes of the previous week and then being able to fix it the way they did.
Yeah, it seemed like everybody contributed in that dominating second half. They outscored UAB 24-0, led by one of their captains, Simeon Blair, who had an interception, nearly a pick 6, and then he had a fumble recovery.
Well, I think it's crazy. I did not know this until we were told in the press box that was the first interception of his college career.
Really?
Simeon Blair.
How about that?
He had never, of all the plays that you can probably count that he made, throughout his career at Arkansas, whatever, he had never had a pick until that game.
Well, he was all smiles on the sideline. I can tell you that from firsthand watching him. They have the turnover belt.
Yeah.
And they're pretty excited when they get that turnover and that belt. I know that everybody seemed to contribute. And then you had Andreas Fox, who was able to play in the second half of the game. He didn't get in until very late in the third quarter, but then made his presence felt in the fourth. He had a sack. And, again, suspended for that first half of the game after what happened in the Tulane game.
Yeah, and so, you had to sit him down. Hopefully he learned from his mistake. Missing out on a half isn't anything too detrimental for the team or for him. And so, you just hope that he learns from that, moves on, put it behind him, and, never speak about it again if you're in that locker room.
So, offensively, UAB got a dose of Blake Watson, and that's what everybody was waiting for after what happened with Tulane, the mystery kind of with Blake Watson in that game against the Green Wave where he was a non-factor and ended up only playing in the first quarter. In this game, we saw what Watson's capable of doing, 125 yards rushing. He caught some passes out of the backfield and overall did some damage to UAB like he has done against most opponents this year.
Yeah, and I asked Ryan about how he would evaluate the run game, to this point. And he said, last week everybody was asking about how can you fix the run game because they didn't run well against Tulane. And then this week they run for, 200 yards or 193 yards or whatever. He said what he's looking for is consistency. And so can you do that next week because you didn't do it the week prior? And so having a healthy Blake Watson, I think, played a role into that. Maybe the run game would have been better against Tulane if Watson was healthy. And so I think having him be as healthy as he can be goes a long way in what this offense can be in terms of the ceiling of what they can do this year.
I completely agree. And then when the running game is going well, it opens things up for the passing game. And what we did not see in this particular game from Seth Hennigan was any forced passes. He took what the defense gave him. utilize the tight ends, which we have not really seen all year long.
I've been waiting. You know, I'm a big tight end guy.
Too.
I've been waiting for that.
You got 2 tight ends who caught touchdowns.
Yeah.
And they hardly had receptions this year, let alone touchdowns.
Well, it was Doyle's first reception of the season.
Yeah.
Touchdown. And I asked Crimsey about it today, and he said, he smiled and said those guys, they do everything that the coaching staff asked them to do, and everything doesn't show up on a stat sheet. And so he said it was cool to see those guys kind of get rewarded with a couple of touchdowns.
Anthony Lanfear was the other tight end to catch a touchdown. What's interesting along those lines about Cramsey, going into that game, we have our Thursday coaches meeting for our broadcast. And I asked him about that, the tight end, because you and I are on the same plane when it comes to, why are you not utilizing the tight ends when the Tigers have had great tight ends over the years, well before you came to Memphis, Frank. They've had a long line of tight ends. But I said that to Tim, and his answer sort of was what he said to you, but he also said, listen, we have a lot of playmakers, and we got to get the ball in the hands. When you have Blankhamsey and when you have Rock Taylor and when you have Drake, we got to get them the ball. So maybe there's not enough opportunities there for the tight end. But in this particular game, Blankhamsey had, 1 catch? He was not targeted that much. So they were able to spread it around, hitting running backs out of the backfield, whether it be Watson or Sutton Smith, taking advantage of those tight ends. I'd like to see more of the players utilized on the offense. Yeah,
but did you see? And I know it got called back because of the ineligible man downfield, but the Tosky Dove touchdown.
Oh gosh,
the same play from Arkansas. That was the they love that play, and every time it's only been like 2 or 3 times they've used it, but it seems to have good results. I know that one got called back, but they had everything they wanted on that one.
Well, here's what I didn't understand. I'm right there on the sideline, and it wasn't a great pass by Hennigan. Tosky, because he's tall, was able to tip it to himself and take it in. And I didn't immediately see the hanky on the field. I wonder what happened here. What's the call? It was an ineligible man downfield. One of the linemen went down. I don't understand on a play like that why a lineman is going downfield, because Hennigan is rolling out. That's designed. He's going to stop and he's going to pop. He's going to throw the pass. There's no need to be blocking downfield.
Yeah, I didn't. So I haven't went back and rewatched the play, but I'm assuming as the offensive lineman, you're trying to sell the fake, right? And so you're trying to sell that you're blocking.
Right.
And I think he just sold it a little too much.
He sold it a little down the field.
Yeah,
that's what he did.
Because if it's actually a run play, it makes sense for the lineman to try to, block a little bit into the second level. And I think he probably just tried to sell the fake a little too much.
Mm-hmm. So after the game, they win convincingly, 45-21. They maintain, or retain, I should say, the Battle for the Bones Trophy. Frank, did you try to lift it up over your head?
No. Everybody who was talking about it said they couldn't. I said, well, if some of these athletes aren't doing it, what the heck am I going to do? Try to, throw my shoulder out of whack trying to lift up that 94-pound trophy.
Jacob Likes, we were talking to him after the game. He said he went on over there, and I don't know how he didn't realize how heavy it was. Now, again, these guys are bench pressing a lot more than 94 pounds, but he went down, and as he just tried to jerk it up, he said, I almost hurt my back because, again, it's heavier than you first think. You look at that thing, that is solid. So I go, yeah, be careful. Don't hurt your back. But speaking of linemen, his buddy, Jonah Gamble, did get hurt late in that game. And I know Ryan on Monday said that they were going to get more information. I'm assuming when an MRI had taken place. Have you heard anything more about Gamble and his situation going into this North Texas game?
No, I haven't, because, we talked to Ryan on Monday, and we don't see him, any more this week. And assistant coaches, they leave it up to the head coach.
They defer to the head coach, knowing
right.
He doesn't have to talk to you guys again.
Right. And so, you don't even ask assistant coaches about injuries because they'll just tell you that, the head coach handle that.
What did you think of Ryan's response when he talked about I asked the question actually on Monday about transparency with injuries. We know that the NFL has an injury report. Who was it? Was it Michigan or the Big Ten?
It was the Big Ten.
The Big Ten said that they're going to have that report, so I assume they had that report on Fridays. What did you think of his answer? And if you were the czar of college football, even though you don't want to admit gambling is a big part of it, but it is, would you make schools have to provide an injury report?
Well, whatever you do, I would have it be consistent. I don't like the idea that one conference is requiring its schools to do that and at this point nobody else is. I mean, I think it needs to be even playing field across the board. And so if the Big Ten is going to do that, either they need to negate that or everybody else needs to follow suit. Whatever you do, obviously as a reporter, I would love to have the injury report because it makes my job easier to cover the team or whatever. But outside of that, whatever you do, it needs to be consistent across the board. Because if, let's say you're in a, I don't know if this applies to bowl games, right? Like what if a Big Ten school plays somebody else in a bowl game? Does that Big Ten school have to still do the injury report while the other school doesn't?
Yeah, I'm not sure what their rule is. But
or even in non-conference games, ahead of the conference schedule. Or is that only when
it may be only conference games?
Yeah, because if it's anything outside of conference games, I think that's at a disadvantage for the Big Ten school.
I agree. I would love uniformity across the board with everything, but we know we don't have that.
Yeah.
We don't have that with collegiate sports, specifically with collegiate football. Okay, so this Saturday, the Tigers travel to Denton, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, north of Dallas and Fort Worth, to take on the Mean Green. Pretty solid team with a very good quarterback in Chandler Rogers, who's thrown for 14 touchdowns and just one interception. He doesn't make mistakes, 1,762 yards. He can also beat you with his legs, has 3 touchdowns rushing, 58 carries, 153 yards. Last week, they went to New Orleans and gave Tulane all they could handle, 28-28 late in the fourth quarter, but the Green Wave were able to score a touchdown and win it 35-28. The Tigers still have the goals in front of them, Frank, but the margin for error is very, very slim. They need to go to Texas and win this football game, but it won't be easy.
Yeah, and I think this is you're having the same kind of conversation against North Texas that you did against UAB before everybody knew that Zeno wasn't going to play, in terms of you're playing against a team that doesn't really have a strong record, but they have a really talented quarterback. Well, it's the same thing with North Texas, right? Like you said, he doesn't turn the ball over. So if you're Memphis, you can't give them extra possessions because they're not going to give you any. And so I think Memphis is in a position to win the game as long as they protect the football and don't shoot themselves in the foot. I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, Ryan has a history with their head coach from his days in the National Football League. Defensively, they're not great. They do have some studs. They got a stud defensive end who may be playing on Sundays. But overall, not a great defense.
And Cramsey, when asked about the defense, obviously he brought up the defensive end and which that could be a story, right? Jonah Gamble,
if he's out.
If he's out, the offensive line isn't an NFL caliber offensive line as it is. And so when you got one of your starters out, we'll see how they're able to, to pivot from that. I don't know who, it'd be interesting to see who they put in his place for, if he doesn't play.
Yeah. So injury is certainly a big part of it, but for the most part, the Tigers came out of that game pretty healthy.
Well, and then obviously Greg Rubin didn't play.
And he should be able to go. Is that the word or not?
So Ryan gives the day-to-day. But what he said they thought he would be able to go last game. They said they warmed him up, and then he wasn't able to go. So the fact that you warmed him up against UAB, you should feel pretty confident that he should be ready to go.
Rubin was very active on the sidelines as a cheerleader, unfortunately, for that game. But he was moving around. He looked good. I thought he was going to get into the game, but again, they ruled him out. So hopefully Greg will be able to go on Saturday. 2:00 kickoff, by the way, from Denton with this game against North Texas.
Home going for Seth?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's, according to Ryan Silverfield, too much phased either way, even though there'll be a lot of family and friends that'll be watching the game firsthand.
Yeah, he's obviously not wrapped up in it. Seth doesn't seem like the type that gets too wrapped up in that. I think it's more exciting for fans and probably for media to cover than it is.
He's a cool
Seth.
customer, right?
And I talked to his dad, and he said, because I was asking him, and this was in the summertime, I asked him, was he excited about him coming to North Texas and everything? He said, to be honest, it's more about the fact that I don't have to travel. I can just go down the street.
Coach's game on Friday night, right? He's a high school coach.
Yeah.
And then not have to travel.
And so he said, as far as the whole nostalgia of him being at home, that is what it is. But he said the fact that they don't have to travel is what they're most excited about.
What's interesting, if you take a gander at the conference standings, which I'm sure you have, the 3 teams that are undefeated in conference play are the 3 teams that people expected to be at the top in the preseason. It's Tulane, it's UTSA, it's SMU. Tigers get to play SMU. They have not played UTSA, and they won't play them unless they, for some reason, met them in the conference championship game, which would mean Tulane would have lost a couple. That's not going to happen. And obviously they played Tulane and lost. Memphis is tied right now, I think, with Rice and somebody else. But they're in that. Okay. So they're in that position where we expected them to be in. But can they take that leap to be in that number 2 slot to make it to the conference championship?
Well, that's the conversation we were having heading into the Tulane game. Like you said, it was 3 teams that were voted ahead of you. 2 of those 3 teams you get to play. You get to be on the field. Like what's the word you like? Mano y mano. You get to play your way into a top tier part of the conference. And obviously they weren't able to get it done against Tulane. But if they run the table now, heading into SMU, which they'll be favored in every game except maybe SMU. I mean, they'll have their chance. The way we were talking about the Tulane game a couple weeks ago will be the same way we're talking about the SMU game if they're able to take care of business up until then. Because if they beat SMU, obviously we'll have to see what happens with UTSA and Tulane and whatever. But I'd be surprised that a 1-loss conference team, a one loss in the conference doesn't get you into the championship game. I'd be surprised. I know there's a possibility that can happen, but I'd be surprised if it. Yeah,
it could be a tie-break situation, but I think Memphis would be in good shape. And like you said, take care of business, beat North Texas, beat USF. They'll play Charlotte before they play SMU. Yeah. Take care of these teams,
Temple
and then
at the end.
Yes, and then it becomes a huge game.
Don't beat SMU and then all of a sudden go down to Philadelphia and find a way to lose that game.
They have had trouble with Temple before. Temple just lost SMU, as you know, 55-0.
Yeah, right.
This is a bad football team. Final thing for you, Frank. We're a week away from Halloween as we tape this podcast, and we'll have a new one for you next week. We'll tape on Halloween. Is it going to be trick or treat with this whole stadium issue? Because October, wasn't that going to be the deadline as far as not the project happening, but a delay in the project? If it wasn't ironed out by October, we're a week away from November and nothing new on the horizon.
Look, I mean, if you're just asking me, my gut feeling says that I don't think we're going to have anything new happening from now until Halloween.
I'm with you.
I mean, the you've got the changing of the guards at Mayor going on. I mean, there's a lot going on to where, like, if they weren't able to get it done up until this point, what makes you think they're going to get it done in this last week? Now, I'll be curious to see because Memphis seems like they want to continue to press the issue of we don't want to change our timetable. And so I wonder if they can figure something out to the point where we don't know how much we're getting, but obviously we're told we're going to get some piece of the pie to the point where we can go ahead and start laying groundwork. I don't know if that's a situation where, like, behind the scenes they say, well, we know that you're at least going to get X amount of dollars. We don't know how much more than that is going to be, but at least you know you're going to have this to start the groundwork. I don't know if that's something that can go on or what, but I know Memphis does not want to change on that timetable if there's a way for them not to.
Yeah, and what you're saying, in a perfect world, that's what should happen, but there's a lot of people that have to write off on it.
Right.
They have to, or sign off on it, excuse me. And who's signing off on it right now when there's still so many details that have not been ironed out? That's the problem. I cannot see them signing off on it and saying, hey, listen, take $100 million of the $350 that the state is allocating and start your work on Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. I don't see them doing anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds
I would
good,
love
but
if
it's
they
not
did.
feasible, right?
Yeah.
I think this whole conversation is just happening at the wrong time in terms of the mayor situation, right? If this was a year, like if Strickland still had a year before the election, maybe some stuff could go faster. But now you're at a point where I think you may have a little bit of a dead period while that changing of the guards is going on.
Yeah, it's a scary situation. You have some, I guess, different councilmen and women as well. You have the state that certainly has to get involved as well. There's a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through. We'll see. But as of now, all the Tigers can do is go out there and try to win as many football games as they can and play in the conference championship game. Frank, great stuff as always. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Appreciate you.
So Tigers football on the road Saturday in Denton, Texas. Meanwhile, the Memphis men's basketball team will see their first action of the season, albeit exhibition, on Sunday afternoon as they'll take on Lane College. And That's Andre Turner, the former Memphis Tiger great, coaching up that team. And here to talk Tigers men's basketball, Daily Memphian Tigers basketball beat writer. That's Parth Upadhyaya. Hey, Parth. How are you?
How's it going? I'm excited.
I hope you are.
That time's almost here, man. Yeah.
It's been a long off season, and I know you've been in the midst of it. The trip to the Dominican Republic, we've talked about that before, all the changes to this roster, and here we are ready to go, albeit, again, a game that does not count on the record. It's a chance for these guys to get out there as a unit, play somebody else on Sunday. Penny non-committal as far as maybe the lineup and the rotation, but I'm sure he's excited and the team's excited to get out there and play.
For sure. And we asked him about that Saturday when they did that event, the Coaching for Literacy basketball clinic over there at Tom Lee Park. And he kind of said that, now's the honeymoon period, right? Like everybody is loving one another. Everybody's happy for whatever role they're playing. But, once the season gets going, whether it be the exhibitions or the regular season, he'll kind of see if that remains to be true, right? Like if it's still going to be, cheering each other on and kind of being happy with whatever role they're given.
So I saw little bits and pieces of the intro video that may or may not be ready for Sunday. Did you see that on X?
I saw, yeah. On
what did
X,
you think
Twitter.
of it?
I thought it was cool. I didn't see, I guess you saw a preview of the video.
I saw pieces, yeah, not the finished product, but I saw pieces as they went and taped that. But I mean, obviously, it's fun for those guys. They dress up real nice. They always do a great job with that. No doubt. I'm getting excited just to see new faces, these new guys that'll be on this team.
See, I thought the hype video was going to be the same one they showed at the preseason tip-off event. Where they're at the field house, but I guess not because they filmed it at Tom Lee Park. Yes, that's what I saw. So that must be different than the one they showed at the Memphis Madness, Student Madness.
Whatever. I would imagine that they'll bring out a new one for the start of the regular season. May not be ready for the preseason for these exhibition games. It may very well be, but they're always having fun, hamming it up, having a good time, and then we'll see what happens. Like you said, once they play for real, how things will iron out as far as lineups, rotations, and things of that nature. So again, from Penny's standpoint, what does he say to you guys? What does he see in this team to this point?
He sees a lot of different scoring options, right? Like a lot of guys who can get their own shot off the dribble, create for others. But the main concern, which has been the concern since we saw the team in the DR, is the defensive ability, right? Like, can this team, improve on that end of the floor? And that kind of, remains to be seen, obviously.
Who are the better defensive players on this team? Because if you look back in years past, he's always put together a defensive-oriented team. He has stressed defense. He has had some top-tier defensive players. Who are those guys on this team?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the issue, right? Like identifying who those guys are. There's not a natural ball stopper like Alex Lomax on this team. I think it's going to be guys like Jalen Young, guys like David Jones, athletes who can kind of move laterally quickly, that are going to be tasked with being the head of the snake, so to speak, in those type of circle defenses that Penny likes to run. But as far as what we've seen as media, we haven't been able to kind of identify who those guys will be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and from a rebounding standpoint, again, same answer. I know you haven't seen these guys that much, but Jordan Brown, who can score the basketball, you hope that he can do his job rebounding the basketball. David Jones is a freak athlete that I'm sure he'll be able to. Jourdain is another guy. He's big. He's got the size. You need these guys to rebound the basketball. And, of course, when Malco's in there, he'll need to rebound the basketball as well. That starts the fast break. That gets the offense in transition.
Absolutely. And you would hope that guys like Jordan Brown and Malcolm can protect the rim as well, which we saw Malcolm do a little bit in spurts last season, but you would hope that can happen for larger amounts of time.
All right, so Javon Quinterly has been in the news a lot here recently, named to the Bob Cousy Award preseason watch list. No surprise after what he did at Alabama. But interesting comments made by his former coach, Nate Oates, at Alabama about Quinterly. And then the response, the retort, if you will, by head coach Penny Hardaway. So for those who haven't read this and they don't know what we're talking about here, give us kind of the lowdown.
Yeah, so Nate Oates, Alabama's coach, last Wednesday at SEC Media Days, kind of was talking about, his point guard, Aaron Estrada, who he brought in from the transfer portal, and kind of hyping him up, so to speak. But within that comment, he said, and I'll read the quote, "I think that makes us a lot better as a team when you don't have to beg your point guard to bring effort every day." So some people assume that was a shot at either Javon Quinterly or Jaden Bradley, who's obviously now at Arizona. But then Oates walked it back later, saying all love for JQ, was just trying to pump up our point guard this year and how good he's been. We had a great run with JQ. We were the number one team in the country with him. He helped raise our program to unprecedented heights. So that was Nate Oates, right? And then Penny, when we asked him about it, we're at Tom Lee Park, he said that, he said, he let it be known. He wasn't trying to sugarcoat anything. If you're Jaden Bradley, if you're Javon Quinterly, and you were there last year, you have to take that to heart. Is Penny Hardaway.
So did he respond after Nate Oates backed off the comments, or was it before he had a response?
After. Oates backed off the same day.
Okay.
The Tuscaloosa News asked him, whether it was intended for, a shot at Javon Quinterly or Jaden Bradley, and obviously he didn't double down on it. He backed, right?
Look, Nate Oates is a really good coach, so I'm not going to knock Nate Oates, but Javon Quinterly has come to Memphis for a reason. He thinks they can win well, win a lot, win hopefully a national championship. He's also playing for a guy who was an absolutely tremendous NBA point guard and a collegiate point guard at Memphis. So I cannot imagine that Javon Quinterly is going to give 50% effort out there. I don't think, and I hope not, that Penny's going to have to push this guy, especially when you have Jalen Young, who appears right now that he'll get a lot of playing time and will be the backup to start the year. I mean, Jalen Young is going to push Javon Quinterly.
He's good, man. Like, people aren't giving him enough credit, yeah.
So Quinterly knows, I'm sure, that, look, this guy's going to push me. I'm here to give it my all, because why even come if you're not going to?
No, I'm sure. And like you said, we would assume that Penny can get through to Javon. And, from the outside looking in, watching Alabama in spurts, I didn't watch them regularly last season. You didn't really see what Oates is talking about. We weren't at practice, though, right? So we don't know if this guy's coming, bringing that energy every day to practice that he's bringing in game day.
Did you see the video that came out? It may have come out yesterday. I saw it yesterday, where it was Ashton Hardaway, and I forget who the other player was. They were going around and they were having fun.
Like interviewing each other? Yeah.
So did you know Ashton had that type of personality?
I did, because we talked to him in the DR. The guys did they did golf and they did horseback riding. They, went on the banana boat. So you kind of got to see a little bit of their personalities come out there. So I knew Ashton was kind of funny, yes.
Seems a little different than his brother. Jaden's more reserved.
Absolutely.
Right? Jaden is introspective type stuff. He's a thinker. Ashton just seems like he's out there having fun. He's a comedian. But Ashton Hardaway, with his ability to shoot the three-pointer, and we talked about it the last time you were on the podcast, that when you look around this roster, you don't see great three-point shooter, great three-point shooter, great three-point shooter, great three. You got to find a couple, and you hope that they will materialize into great three-point shooters. And Ashton Hardaway is one of those guys who has the ability, but he's also making the transition from high school to college, which is not the easiest thing to do. Exactly.
And I think that's Ashton's best chance of getting on the floor and seeing, long stretches of minutes, right? Is that specialist ability to shoot the three ball. David Jones is somebody who, from when we've seen him in open practices, he's been knocking those down as well. Jaquan Walton. So they've got options, right? It's not like Ashton's the only person that can shoot threes, but he's probably their best three-point shooter at this point.
I think Walton's probably the one player out of all the players that intrigues me the most. He's got great size for a wing player, really
6'7",
good size,
yeah.
And he can shoot the three. Like you said, I think in the end, he will take the most three-point shots. I'm not sure if he'll make the most three-point shots. I think he'll take the most three-point shots.
Over David Jones as well, you think?
I do. Because Jones, we were talking the last time, and you weren't even positive that, in your opinion, whether or not David was going to start or not, right?
Yeah, and that was my mentality kind of early in the preseason, just thinking that they'd go with the more traditional lineup, starting Nick Jourdain next to Jordan Brown. But
have you changed your mind?
Everything we've seen from David Jones suggests that he might be the best player on this team in terms of being able to score. Not the most important player. I think that's Javon Quinterly. He's the guy that's going to stir the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak, the conductor. But I think David Jones is the guy that's going to have the ball when the shot clock's winding down, when they need a bucket in crunch time.
But if Jones doesn't bring it, and I'm not saying he can't do it.
Right.
I just don't know enough about his game. He played at St. John's. If he can't bring it on the defensive end, and let's say Jordan Brown's more of an offensive-oriented player, although he's big and he'll get rebounds, that's when you probably need Jourdain because he's got good size.
And he can play really good defense. Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Exactly.
And Penny's always going to lean toward that guy who could play defense. But that gives Penny options.
So many options.
And that's what you want.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the struggle, too. When I spoke to Penny in Dallas, he talked about kind of the struggle of having so many good players, right? So many great players is the ego management, the balance, getting guys to buy in. And, we saw that not go so well, 2 seasons ago when you had Amani Bates, Jalen Duren, and a bunch of veterans alongside them. So, Penny said he's learned from that, and I guess we'll find out soon.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think that could be an issue?
I mean, certainly, right? That's the biggest question mark. Like, can these guys come together? The talent, I mean, if you're looking at it from a talent perspective, it's a top 25 team, right? Like, there's no doubt collective talent-wise, but whether as a whole they can come together and be that team and reach their potential is the main concern.
Has the DeAndre Williams ship sailed?
It has not. It doesn't look good,
almost
right?
in November, for goodness
sakes.
Right.
I reached out to Don Jackson yesterday, who said there's no update yet. So we're still kind of waiting.
The opening game is November 6th versus Jackson State. As you know, the first 3 games, Penny Hardaway will not be coaching the team. Has a decision been made? You would think it's Rick Stansbury, the newcomer, but the former head coach at Mississippi State, at Western Kentucky, would be the guy running the show.
Yeah, you would assume. He hasn't, Penny hasn't come out and said definitively that's going to be Rick Stansbury. However, early on in the preseason or the offseason, he did allude to that Rick would probably be the guy running the ship for those first 3 games. But he hasn't come back and said that yet, right?
How important is this, Parth? And we talk about this every single year, for the Tigers to get off to a really good start with these tournaments that they play seemingly every year because of the weakness of the conference.
Man, it's more important than ever. The window is so tight this year, right? Like, because the AAC it's trash. I mean, I was looking at the numbers earlier. There are 2 teams in the top 50 of KenPom, just 2. That's Memphis and FAU. Memphis at 32, FAU at 37. Then it drops all the way down to 87, North Texas, and kind of so on and so forth. So your opportunities are from November 6th through December 31st or whatever, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, and when we talk about the importance of it, it's not necessarily Memphis getting into the NCAA tournament or not. Now, if they lose all these non-conference games,
right,
they're not getting into the tournament. We're talking about seeding.
Correct.
And seeding is pivotal. There are some people that just don't look at the big picture about seeding. Getting to the tournament is fine and dandy, but if you're sitting there as a 10 or a 9.
Even an 8,
Even an 8.
Not ideal.
Now, last year was weird, the whole Florida Atlantic ending and what Florida Atlantic was able to do, and the Tigers were one and done. But if you can get yourself a 5 seed, 4 seed, 6 seed, because you line up against teams again in a better positive situation for you to make a run to get to the Sweet 16, to get to that second weekend. That's all because of what you do during the regular season.
For sure. And I think even when you get to the conference slate, like anything less than, and you let me know what you think, but anything less than 15-3 is not going to cut it as far as getting out of that 8-9 line, I don't think.
Conference play, you cannot lose more than 3 games.
Exactly.
You cannot. Now, I still think they're a better team than Florida Atlantic. We'll see. I'm not going to knock Florida Atlantic. They got most of their guys back. They made the great run to the Final Four last year. But let's say you split. You win on your home court. They win on their home court. Where are those other 2 losses coming from? Maybe you throw in a clunker, right? A clunker somewhere. Maybe
trip up at UAB, perhaps.
Maybe a UAB,
right,
maybe
right.
a Tulane. 2 clunkers? That's even asking a lot.
But
after that, you would be talking about 3, 4, 5 clunkers because none of those teams in there, like you just said, by looking at KenPom, maybe they'll get off to a great start, and we'll be talking differently about one of these teams.
Exactly.
But you have a lot of teams that have entered this conference now, like Rice, and they're just not good. Let's be honest. Let's not sugarcoat
it's worse than last year. KenPom has this league as the 7th, or not even, I think it was like 7th or 8th best league. I got to double check, but it's behind all Power 5 leagues, behind the Big East, behind the Mountain West.
It's funny because it's not funny.
It's down there.
Where a win doesn't help you. But a loss can cripple you in the conference.
Exactly.
Unless, again, it's against Florida Atlantic. All right, so final thing, Sunday, again, first taste of this team, exhibition game against Lane. What do you expect to see?
What I'm looking for is, like we talked about, the defensive end. Have they fixed those issues that Penny's harped on, whether it be, closing out on shooters, rotating better, that kind of thing. And, I want to see how the pieces fit. That's also one of the main points that we talked about, on this podcast and before is, who starts, who comes off the bench, and how will these guys kind of gel together? Obviously, when you're playing, Lane College, only so much can be gleaned from that, but we'll get that first taste for sure.
Dress rehearsal number 1 on Sunday.
Sir.
Then next Thursday, dress rehearsal number 2 against Lemoyne Owen before they open up on November 6th. So next week, we'll talk to you, Parth, about actual game. Even though, again, it's an exhibition, we'll get a little better feel of where these
real
where
basketball
this team stands.
to cover.
Absolutely.
Finally. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great stuff.
Appreciate it.
Well, that's going to do it for us this week on the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with Greg Gaston. Big thanks to Frank Bonner and to Parth Upadhyaya. Be sure to check out our other podcasts. The Daily Memphian's Food Podcast, Sound Bites, is hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes is about arts, culture, and everything in between. And the Grizzlies podcast is also hosted by Chris Harrington with Drew Hills. The Grizzlies open up their season this week. All of our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. Until next week, take care.